Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. It's just me and the producer. So, one half of your favorite spooky horror hosts, Emma. And like I said,
Excuse you, one and a half of you.
and I'm also here with the producer. We are here with a new kind of formatted episode. This episode kind of comes on the heels of us being on spring break, and our sweet Allison is actually going and watching the eclipse right now in Austin, Texas. So doing a little bit of a different style episode today to be able to still give you guys some content. And we've actually been wanting to do this for a little while and want this to kind of become a regular thing. But essentially what we're doing today is kind of a mini episode of our initial thoughts on a new horror movie that just came out. The producer and I actually saw Late Night with the Devil on Sunday, on the day of the Sabbath. And I'm really excited to kind of give you just like first impressions. I have a few like questions that I'm sort of asking myself within this little mini review today. And we want to make this like a regular thing. So the producer and I have actually been kind of bouncing some names off of each other. And I think that when this episode goes live, we are actually going to put a poll to see if people like some of the names that we came up with. And our top two are New Nightmares. And then choice number two, which we really liked a lot, was Fresh Frights. I'm a little partial to New Nightmares. I just think that sounds really cool. And it kind of reminds me of Freddy Krueger a little bit. But yeah, let us know what you think and vote in the poll after you finish listening to this episode.
AKA vote for Fresh Frights.
AKA vote for New Nightmares.
It's Fresh Frights.
You know what?
Let's go.
Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
I will campaign this.
So normally when we do a full-length episode, we really get into the meat and potatoes of the film, and we like to give a little kind of spoiler warning. I am going to give you a little bit of a warning, maybe just the meat, sans potatoes, but we are going to spoil a few things in this little kind of mini thoughts review. So we're also just going to graze over things as much as possible too as well. So we're not going to spoil everything for you, and definitely still want you to watch it and get all of the juicy details.
So keep your potatoes, but we're going to have the meat.
Yep. But yeah, without further ado, I want to just dive right into Late Night with the Devil. So this film actually originally came out at South by Southwest, and it has garnered a lot of positive attention. People really, really liked it. And Karen's brothers, they created this film. It was co-written and directed by both of them. And so, naturally, new horror, definitely was intrigued. Something I absolutely wanted to see. Before we start things off, I want to give like a quick synopsis of the film. A live television broadcast in 1977 goes horribly wrong, unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. This stars David Dastmalchian. I think I got that right. And he plays the host of the late night talk show, and his name is Jack Delroy. And then we have a couple other key players here. We have Laura Gordon, who plays Dr. June Ross Mitchell, Ian Bliss, who plays Carmichael Haig. And then we also have Faisal Bazi, who plays Christo, and then Ingrid Torelli, who plays Lily, and Reese Oteri, who plays Gus. Gus is kind of like the co-host. So imagine, you're on Conan, and I forget what his
He's the Andy Richter to Conan.
There you go. Thank you. This is all taking place in the 70s. And just to kind of dive right into the film, and apologies, I am so used to giving very thorough reviews of films. So I'm trying to cut it down quite a bit. But we essentially open with, it's almost like news coverage, kind of like old school documentary style. And they are covering a story about Jack Delroy, this host of this late night TV show called The Night Owls. And during the 70s, he was super successful. He was doing really, really well with this late night talk show, but he could never quite match.
I think it was Johnny Carson, right?
Johnny Carson, I think.
Yeah. Because I think that's around that time, Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show was reigning supreme.
Yes. Yeah. And so he had done so many different things, and he was really up there, but he just could never quite compare And so this story is essentially a found footage film. And we don't get a lot of background of where the footage was found, so to speak. We don't really get like to know who found it, who is like the person essentially who's like showing us this, you know, from their perspective. We don't get a lot of that background information, but they do kind of set the story up nicely in the very beginning to say that Jack was really just living the high life. He was doing really well. People really resonated with him. He had an amazing, beautiful wife who was also kind of in show business. I believe she was like a dancer and on Broadway. And we also kind of immediate in the very beginning of the film, we get a little bit of a glimpse that there's also some rumors circulating within the press and in the media that he's also part of a cult called the Grove. And this is actually a real cult in real life called Bohemian Grove. I was reading an article on the Washington Post about it earlier, and the Bohemian Grove is where the rich and powerful go to misbehave. And this is essentially a cult that does its business in the redwoods of California. And there's all kinds of rumors about what goes on there, from satanic rituals, sacrifices, weird kind of spells and manifestations of wealth and power. And so, you know, I don't think that Jack Delroy in the film ever is like confirming that he's a member of this cult, but there's definitely like rumors circulating within the media. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, especially when you're first diving into this film. Then we're hit with the fact that unfortunately Jack Delroy's wife gets terminal cancer. She gets lung cancer, even having not been a smoker, and she unfortunately loses her life. And he takes a little bit of time off the show, and he does come back with his producer, his co-host, and his whole crew, and they really want to be better than ever. What can we really do to kind of bridge that gap between where he is and where Johnny Carson and any other late night hosts are? Because again, like Jack Delroy is really, really close to the top, but he's like not quite there. So they devise kind of a plan that they are going to have one of their traditional Halloween episodes. They're going to have a variety of different guests on. And this will include someone who's kind of like a medium. This will include someone who kind of dabbles in hypnotism and magic, but they're also like a huge skeptic, and they're willing to prove it. And then they also want to have Dr. June Ross Mitchell, who I believe she's a psi therapist, or
But
yeah.
It sounded like somewhere in the psychiatric, psychological realm.
Yeah. And I think like the point there too is that she is kind of a psychologist, but she also like dabbles and has expertise in the paranormal, I believe. So Jack Delroy wants to bring her on with her subject of a book that she had just written called like Confessions from the Devil or something like that. I actually like wanted to look up the book after to see if it was actually released.
I think it was Conversations with the Devil.
That's what it is. Yeah. And it was really cool because honestly, it had a really cool cover and I love to read. And I was like, damn, I want to read that. Anyways, June has a subject who was essentially rescued. It was a 13-year-old girl at this point, but she was rescued when she was 10 from a demonic Satanist cult. And they were said to have been doing some sacrifices and potentially sacrificing children in these weird rituals. And it actually got to a point where cops and like a SWAT team came in and were trying to do a raid. And basically the leader of the cult and everyone in the home or in the house that the cult was occupying decided to douse themselves with gasoline and just light the whole place on fire. However, this one girl, Lily, was the sole survivor, and she was 10 at the time that she was rescued. And Dr. June Ross Mitchell decided to kind of take her in, study her, so to speak, and study her experience with this like cult that she had been a part of. And through that, she had some experiences with Lily essentially being possessed by one of the demons that was probably a regular at the cult house, if you know what I mean.
Just your regular demonic spirit, bro.
What's up, bro? I'll bring the hot tamales.
Oh, what's up, bro? We're sacrificing another kid. Oh, that's tight.
Oh my gosh, yeah. But anyways, these are like the guests essentially that Jack Delroy wants to have on his late night show in this, specific Halloween episode. And it also happens to be a time of year where I forget what they call it.
It's called Sweeps Week.
Sweeps Week.
Yeah.
And
So it's not so prominent now because they do a lot more of them and everybody watches like TV on
Yep.
streaming and whatnot. But back when everybody actually watched TV on television, Sweeps Week was when they would do the majority of their ratings. And it would start from like Monday to Sunday. And that's why this week was such a big deal.
Yep.
I don't know if you're going to mention this at any point, but I saw a fun fact that the only reason that they had this taking place in the 70s was because it was the only time in history Sweeps Week was on Halloween. So it could have really been in any time period that they would have tried to pull this like film off, because Sweeps Week in this year, specifically in the 70s, was on Halloween, which is why it was in around that time period.
I love that. Yeah. And so the fact that it also lands on Halloween was very significant because they have this crazy episode lined up. And so now we are in the part of the film where we're actually kind of part of this like live taping, so on and so forth. So now we've moved to the like actual found footage part of the film. And there is a little bit of a introduction before this starts, basically saying like this is like footage found from like the last episode of the Night Owls talk show. What I really love about like this part of the film and them kind of like diving right into like the found footage part is that it kind of like unfolds in real time with real footage, quote unquote, from this episode. And it's in this like amazing grainy 70s kind of footage. And I think that the people that made this film really did an amazing job making it feel truly like it was coming from the 70s. And then I also really liked that we would be watching it almost like we're watching it on TV, but then they would cut to a break and things would go kind of behind the scenes. But when they went behind the scenes, I loved how they would cut everything in black and white, which I thought was really a cool way to break things up so that you actually felt like, okay, I watched the found footage part and now things are black and white. So this is kind of like that background, like behind the scenes, like footage, if that makes sense.
I like that they kept everything in a 4:3 format too.
Yes.
That's what the format of the TVs would, up until mid 2000s were. If you really think about it, that's kind of ballsy to like bring out a new film that is not even taking up
totally
the majority of everybody's TV screens.
Yep. 100%. Well, and then the next thing that we see is the show has started and everyone in the audience, most people are dressed up for Halloween, and Jack Delroy comes out and he's super excited for the episode and is like, we've got loads of fun stuff for you guys, yada, yada. It's very, very classic 70s night talk show. And then there's also Gus, the co-host kind of guy, the sidekick, is even at the very beginning of this film, he's already kind of like concerned with what Jack has stirred up for the episode. He's like, hey, Jack, I heard some rumors that things might be changing and that we might be doing a special segment at the end. Like, can you give me a heads up on what's happening? And everyone's sort of just skirting around it and doesn't want to give Gus like the information, which already tells you as the person actually viewing this film that something bad's going to happen. And they just don't want everyone to know.
It's because Gus is the logical one. Nobody wants to share anything with him.
Even though he's dressed up as a little devil. Gus, you little devil. So yeah, as we kind of move forward, the first guest that comes out is a man named Christo, and he has a very thick accent and he is dressed almost like a sultan from like Arabia or something. And he's got a beautiful gold jacket on, very kind of like 70s vibes. And he is explaining to the audience he's a medium, that he talks with, the dead. And he does have a couple of interactions within the audience of people that he's trying to kind of like read, maybe loved ones that have passed, and he's like feeling signals and whatnot. And it's actually kind of funny, like the first person that he thinks that he's kind of getting a reading from ends up kind of being a dud. So then we kind of lose a little bit of credibility on this Christo guy kind of right out of the gate. Then he has another amazing moment where he is able to connect with a woman and her daughter, and they had a son that took his own life. And so they're having a very emotional moment. And you can tell like Christo's kind of proud of himself. He's like, okay, finally we got someone that it worked.
We got a sucker.
And then he has this like crazy moment where he starts screaming, and you can tell that he just has like a lot of pressure going on in his mind. And he's just, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like Professor X when like he's having like a vision in X-Men, and it kind of like hurts him like physically.
It's like gently touching his temples like he's doing something really important.
Yes. And he's like, like that. It just like seems very painful and almost like they have like a little creature trying to come out of their belly like in Alien 3.
Obviously, it's a film, so it's all an act, but it seemed like an act until his freaking eyes rolled in the back of his head. And then we're like, okay, this is real.
Yeah, it got spooky.
That's
for
not just a
sure.
party trick.
And people were like not taking it seriously too, which was kind of funny. Even Christo himself was like, I'm fine. And he ends up kind of sticking around as Jack introduces the next guest. And the next guest is a man named Carmichael Haig. And he is this like hypnotist, kind of like ex-magician man kind of thing. And he's also a huge skeptic, like I mentioned before too. So he does not believe at all in magic, in spirits. He believes that there's a logical explanation for everything. And he starts immediately kind of like trying to debunk everything that just happened with that man. So he's like, oh, I bet you that someone was asking the audience members questions, and that's how you got this insider information of the people that you claim that you had visions for, yada, yada. And then we get this really kind of scary scene where Christo has another kind of episode, and he actually ends up puking black, like goo, gunk, kind of like all over the set, all over the skeptic guy, Carmichael.
Like tar.
It's like tar. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And he's escorted off, and they're like, okay, we need to get this guy some medical attention. All the while, people are still watching. This is all still rolling. And Jack, our main TV host, is doing a great job basically telling everyone, don't worry, he's getting medical attention backstage, like we're all good. And one thing I do want to mention actually before we move on is that actually before Christo was taken backstage, he actually said that he was getting like a message by someone named Minnie. And at first, Jack kind of asks like the whole audience, oh, is anyone out there have like a Minnie? And then he quickly is trying to make a connection like, oh, maybe it's a Molly or what have you. And Christo is very clear. He's like, nope, it is Minnie. And again, he's like saying this through his like stressed out, like clenched teeth. He's not having a good time. And he's like, I'm seeing a Minnie, like who's Minnie, blah, blah, blah. So keep that in mind because that is going to come into play a little bit later. But that is something that happens kind of right before he gets escorted backstage after he throws up all the black tar. So then as like that's kind of happening, Jack is also having kind of these like side conversations every time they're on a break with his producer. And they're talking about, oh, like, has June landed yet with the girl? And it seems like really our big climactic event, so to speak, of this like talk show is going to be when Dr. June comes out with Lily. And we're not exactly sure what that's going to be and what that's going to entail. And that's kind of like, as the person viewing this film, you are really excited for that. Like you almost feel like you are kind of in the audience of this talk show and you're like, oh, I can't wait for the next guest. Like,
I'm excited for the late night with the devil. I've been waiting for the devil to show up this entire time.
We are waiting for the devil.
I thought it was Gus in this cute little costume. I'm like, oh, there it is. There's the devil.
There he is, that little devil.
There's that little
devil. We love Gus. And also, speaking of Gus is like kind of freaking out.
Wouldn't you?
He's like, okay, our first guest threw up black tar and he's clearly not okay. And now you're telling me that like there's some other segment that's happening, but no one's telling him the details. So obviously he can conclude that it's something weird. He also knows that Jack is in a very desperate place. I think he knows deep down this is kind of make it or break it for Jack. It's sweeps week. He is still trying to bridge the gap on the ratings, and it's just been really hard. And he knows that Jack has something up his sleeve, and he's very scared of what it's going to be. And then as Carmichael is talking about his skepticism and, you know, his hypnosis, he is legendary for having like hypnotized like an entire room of people to do something kind of crazy. He also talks about how he keeps a check in his breast pocket of his jacket for $100,000 for anyone that can prove to him that the paranormal or any of these weird magic things are real. And Jack playfully asks him, oh, like, have you ever given anyone, you know, the check? And he's like, nope, not yet. Never signed it over. And he even ups the ante for the show and says if anyone can prove to him, he's happy to sign a $500,000 check. So that also makes for really great TV, if I do say so for myself, because then you're really hoping that the people that are coming on next are going to maybe give him a run for his money, literally. So then finally, we have Dr. June and Lily, and they are able to join the show. And I want to make a quick note too that unfortunately, we find out during one of the behind the scenes that Christo actually did not make it. And as he was en route to Cedars-Sinai in LA, he unfortunately passed away. And they said that essentially, at first they say that he was hemorrhaging, but when I think of hemorrhaging, I think blood. But I think that later they clarify that he was hemorrhaging this black tar and it was uncontrollable and the paramedics could not stop it and he eventually died. So everyone that knows about it, they're trying to keep it hush hush, but people on the set are talking. There are stagehands that are talking and producers, cameramen. And so it's kind of trickling out to everyone. And I think that Jack and his producer, I think his producer's name is Leo. Jack and Leo are super scared that news is going to get to Gus and to potentially the studio audience. So they're really trying to keep it like hush hush until this episode is over.
First stop, no one's telling Gus.
Yeah.
Don't tell Gus.
Don't tell Gus. Don't tell Gus. As we kind of dive into this next part of the film with Dr. June and Lily, Dr. June tells Jack backstage that she's actually really, really uncomfortable with the thought of trying to essentially like make connection with this demon inside of Lily, even though she is at a point now where they can kind of sort of control it, which seems kind of weird to me that you could like control that. But I guess, Dr. June and Lily have gotten to a place in their relationship where they feel like they can kind of control the demon a little bit and not let anything get out of hand. But being in a TV studio, with a TV audience and all these people that they've never met before, that's a very uncontrolled environment. And Dr. June is super nervous and rightfully so. And she kind of warns Jack like, hey, I don't know if doing an actual conjuring, so to speak, would be very wise. Like, obviously we can still be on and we can talk. I really don't think we should do this. And Jack, of course, he kind of ambushes her actually live on TV and gets her to agree to doing a very controlled demonstration if she can have the cooperation of all the crew and the audience. And they proceed to try to do it. So we actually see June having kind of a session with Lily, and they are set up in two chairs right across from each other in kind of the middle of the stage. And everyone in the crew has been advised to be extremely quiet so that Dr. June can really have full control of the room.
Imagine trying to get full control of a 13-year-old teenager, though.
Yeah,
impossible.
Hell no.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised that it was as controlled as it was.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Everyone's in freaking Halloween costumes. They want to party.
Absolutely. There's witches and skeletons and ghosts and devils.
It was crazy. So then Lily does make a connection, and we actually see it's kind of like The Exorcist, where like the face changes and we see like scarring and the deep set, like dark circles under the eyes. Like we see that essentially with this. And we see the demon also kind of trying to speak through Lily as well with a different voice. And it's very creepy. The demon actually turns to Jack at one point and says like, "Nice to see you, Jack." And it's just very like unnerving and alarming. And this is like kind of what you are here for as the viewer of this film, right? Like we're finally getting to the late night with the devil. You know what I mean?
The devil's here. The conversation with the devil can commence.
He is here. And so as like this is all happening, I mean, the studio audience is completely enthralled. They have like small moments of oohs and ahs, and Dr. June's like very quick to kind of shut them up. Essentially, she's like, everyone, like, be quiet. This is a controlled environment. And things get a little bit crazy where June is having a hard time kind of pulling Lily out of the possession. And she finally does get her to kind of release the connection from the demon. And she feels horrible that she kind of just put Lily through that. And then everything cuts to break. And during the break, she's talking to Jack and she's like, "Jack, I told you that this was going to happen. That was not great for her at all. Like she's exhausted, whatnot." And they decide to stay and kind of continue with the show. They're not going to be doing any more possessions, so to speak, but they're going to stand by. They're going to talk to Carmichael and see if he can explain away some of the things that just happened. So then we get to a very interesting part of the film where we see Carmichael and he brings Gus over to him and he hypnotizes Gus. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but I actually love this part of the film. But he hypnotizes Gus to see some really, really crazy things. And at the same time that he's hypnotizing Gus, he's actually hypnotizing the entire studio audience and everyone, so to speak, at home as well. And after they have this kind of like interaction where Gus, he's actually terrified apparently of worms. And there is this scene where he is pulling worms out of his neck and out of his stomach through this like hypnosis. And we find out shortly after that none of that was real. And it truly was all just hypnosis by Carmichael. And they even asked to play the tape back so that they can actually see what Carmichael actually said during the hypnosis. And he proves it wrong. He proves that, yeah, you guys all at home, you guys in the audience, Gus, you guys all thought that the worms were real, but we can show you on this playback that that's not actually what happened.
Poor Gus.
Poor Gus.
You know what? Some people don't deserve to have worms coming out of their stomach.
Yeah.
He's scared of them. And the devil.
He's so scared. Yeah.
He should have dressed as a worm for Halloween. Face his fears.
So then after Carmichael does this whole thing, he's trying to explain that the same thing that he just did to Gus is essentially what Dr. June just did to the whole studio audience, to everyone at home, and to Lily. That it was all just a hypnosis and that none of it is valid. And Lily's like, well, why don't you roll the tapes then and we'll see if it actually happened. And what do you know? We rolled the tapes and yeah, it all looks legit. It does not seem like there is any weird hypnosis going on. And Carmichael's having a pretty hard time trying to explain away like what some of that was. And another thing to note too is that as they're kind of like reviewing this footage of the possession of Lily, we see like a strange kind of flash, and we see that Jack actually asks production if they can kind of slow it down like frame by frame. And we see this flash, and then eventually it becomes a image of Madeline's spirit appearing next to him. Then almost immediately afterwards, we have Lily, and she has now gone back into her demonic state without Dr. June kind of helping her to make that connection, which is very scary and kind of an indication that things are about to go awry. And she starts kind of fucking shit up at this point. She unfortunately kills our pal Gus and snaps his neck.
He went full exorcist.
Yeah, it's very spooky. Then she has her eyes set on Carmichael and she kind of burns him to death. We see that June is actually held up kind of like she's being hung essentially. I forget what she's being hung with.
She pulled out she had a crucifix on her necklace.
Yes.
She pulled it out. I think in the whole Power of Christ compels you, and she got hung by that.
Yep, totally. And Leo is also killed too, the producer of the show. And the audience begins to just like run for their lives. Like they're like, fuck this, gotta get out of here. And then Jack kind of goes into this weird state. And this is the only real time in the film where we're essentially going into like kind of like his inside thoughts. And this is like not a found footage part. We find Jack and he is experiencing some really horrifying visions of himself throughout like some past episodes. And things are starting to kind of all make sense. And actually one thing that Lily said to him during her first kind of possession with Dr. June is not only did she say, oh, Jack, like it's nice to see you again, but she tells everyone, oh, we met amongst the tall trees, which then kind of bridges that gap and makes that connection between Lily and the demonic cult that she was a part of, and then also this Grove cult that Jack is rumored to be a part of that we kind of mentioned earlier in that episode. And we see like this kind of series of like visions that Jack is going through, and it actually kind of ends with him in bed with his wife, Madeline, and she's very sick. She has lost all of her hair and she looks really bad. And they kind of have like a little conversation together, and you can kind of put together that unfortunately Madeline was the collateral and the price of power and fame that Jack had to pay. This was his sacrifice that he made being a part of this cult and everything that he kind of had to give up in order to reach the status that he was so craving. It's really, really sad. And we see that Madeline actually asks Jack if he can grab a dagger that he has next to him on a table and just put her out of her misery. And he goes to do that. And as that happens, we see things change back to reality, so to speak. And we see that Jack has actually stabbed Lily, and Jack is now standing kind of amongst all of the massacre that's happening on the set. So all of the different people that have been killed, and we just hear sirens, and Jack is still alive. This is almost like another type of punishment for him, sort of, to have to stay alive now too, after all of this that has happened. And all of this is caused by him and his actions and his decisions. So he has to now live with this. And we just see it kind of slowly pan out, and he is in complete shock. And he just repeatedly mutters, "Dreamers, stay awake." That is kind of like the general gist of the film. Obviously, I left out a lot of details because this is supposed to be just a very kind of quick overview of the film. So some of my initial expectations that I had kind of going into this film is that I had heard a lot about it, but I hadn't seen a lot about it necessarily. So like I had seen a lot of different horror creators that I follow or that we follow mention it and say how they really liked it and then they thought it was really good. I don't think I ever actually even saw like a full trailer of it. I only knew from like photos and just advertisements kind of what the general gist was. I knew it was like kind of talk show 70s vibes. But I will say, like, I think it definitely, met up to my expectations. I was really hoping that it was going to be something a little bit different than what we've seen. There were a couple of things that I didn't love about it. I felt like there was so much talk about how good it was. And honestly, I was really hoping that we would hang out with the devil a little bit more. I feel like it took kind of a while to get to the part of like the possessions, and then the actual possession part sort of fell short for me. But I didn't really go into the film being super scared. I didn't feel like the music was super scary, again, because it's kind of found footage. So there really wasn't a ton of like soundtracky music, which can sometimes really, really contribute to the atmosphere of a film. I think there were a couple moments, like a couple of looks that Lily gave when she was possessed, I think kind of freaked me out a tiny bit, but nothing like too crazy. I wouldn't say this was like a super, super scary film.
I would say the scariest thing about Lily and the Devil was her blank stare.
Yes,
That's
totally.
what it was. It was the blank stare into the camera, just nothing behind those eyes.
Yeah, she did a lot of staring into the cameras. She would always ask Jack, like, what camera do I stare into? And he's like, you don't have to. So that was kind of fun. I will say too that in terms of like the performances, I was really impressed. I thought that David Dastmalchian did a really great job. I am a fan of his in previous films that he's done. He's been in a lot. I think that he is really talented, and I think he's got an eye for like creepy, but without being creepy, if that makes sense. Like he is not like creepy, but there's something about his demeanor and something about him as an actor that just perfectly marries himself into this film and really plays that sort of TV host who you can tell like is kind of a nice guy, but you can tell that there's some darkness behind those eyes.
It's the charm.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
that
He's
late
charming.
night host charm.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And you almost like him a lot from the get-go too of the film, because they talk about his like romance with his wife and how he was devastated when she passed. And you're like rooting for him. You're like, oh man, I want him to like be a top rated talk show host. I want him to own the late night. And so all of that is like really interesting. I also really, really enjoyed the performance of Lily, the young girl who played the chosen one. I've never seen her in anything else. So I think if this was like her first feature film, I think she did a great job and I'd love to see more of her. She was definitely very creepy. And also I really loved Gus.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Gus. And I will say that one of the most memorable scenes for me with the amazing hypnosis scene that Carmichael did on Gus. And this was a scene I was talking about a little bit earlier that I said I would go into more detail on. So within this scene, Carmichael, he hypnotizes Gus and he makes Gus believe that he is getting hot and itchy. And Gus starts taking off his jacket and unbuttoning his shirt, and he becomes super red. And we literally see Gus pull a worm out of the side of his neck, actually multiple worms. And then we start seeing Gus itch at his stomach and pull his stomach skin open to reveal literal thousands of worms coming out of his stomach. And I thought that scene was brilliant. I was not expecting it at all, first off. I loved that it had to do with like hypnosis. So they could easily kind of like explain that, oh, this is just something that you guys were all seeing under this like cloak of hypnosis, but this didn't really happen.
I thought the worm scene was cool. It seemed practical. It seemed very classic 70s horror-esque. You know what I mean? Something just absolutely absurd and obscure coming out of someone's stomach.
Totally.
And then I was bummed that it wasn't real.
And I feel like that was like one of the biggest parts of the film that used like real like gore and kind of just like, I mean, to your point, like effects. And I think I really just enjoyed that a lot. I was like, oh, finally, like we've got some like blood and guts, so to speak, worms and guts.
Worms and Gus.
I did like the practical effects, but I do kind of feel like the CGI was shit. Actually, in the very ending scene when Lily is possessed, her head sort of kind of splits in half and she looks like it's just like emanating light. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit of a cop out.
And that part was really confusing to me too, because like with the worms thing, the whole practical effects, classic horror, and then even when the possession starts, you see the scabs on her face, and that wasn't heavy makeup, but it was kind of exorcist-esque. But
Yeah.
then at the very end, we went full poltergeist, and all of a sudden there's a giant light beam coming out of her face, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
And it
it
was
was
so fake.
I really like horror that comes off as believable.
Same.
You know what I mean? And
totally.
I would have believed all of, in a real sense. But yeah, at the end with that whole thing, I was like, oh, it's over.
It was just kind of a bummer. Yeah, totally. Totally. I think like another thing too is that there is quite a debate on the use of AI in this film. And I want to touch on this just really, really quickly. When we're watching the film and we're like, quote unquote, like on the TV show and we're watching the TV show, there are a couple of cuts to break where they show a still image and they're Halloween themed because this is like their Halloween themed episode. And one of them is a skeleton and it looks kind of like a dancing skeleton. It's super cute. It looks very 70s. And you can tell right away that it's AI. I mean, it has the wrong number of fingers, as we all know, which is like a telltale sign of AI being used. And there's a couple other things that just like are not right. And the filmmakers, the Cairns brothers, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but the Cairns brothers did admit, yeah, we did use a little bit of AI. It's probably like less than 10 seconds of the entire film. And I understand both sides of the argument. A lot of people are really upset that AI was used at all because those little illustrations could have been something that a artist would have been able to make. And so I do get the argument on that side. However, we all have to remember too that I believe that this film was actually made in 2022 and released the following year, last year at South by Southwest. So in 2022, we didn't know as much about AI as we do now, and we also didn't have as many opinions about AI as we do now. I don't think that it was terrible for the filmmakers to experiment a little bit with some AI because let's be honest, again, it was like less than 10 seconds in the film, and this could have been something maybe even like an intern would have made, or this film was very low budget, so I doubt that they were hiring really high-skilled animators to do this. They might have just like really needed to get it done, and so this was an option that they wanted to go down. I don't fault them for doing that. I definitely would not want to see something that has a ton of AI, and I'm really glad that they only used it in that small amount. But I would say personally, let's give them a little bit of a break.
Yeah, because I think if we were talking about this 2 years ago, before kind of like AI like really, really took off, we'd probably like, wow, that is so cool. You made that with AI? Whoa. Now it's like, ugh.
Yeah, there's definitely a different tone to it. Like, I feel like when AI was first coming out, people were like so stoked about it.
We've all seen Terminator. We know what happens.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to mention too is just like kind of like the symbolism in this film. I think that there's a bit of a double meaning with the title Late Night with the Devil. So if we think about it, if you've never watched this film before, you're probably thinking, okay, this is a late night host, a late night TV show, and they're going to have some kind of devil possession on or something of that sort. And yes, that does happen. However, if we think a little bit deeper about it, is Jack maybe also some version of the devil or one of the devil's disciples, so to speak? And, Late Night with the Devil could be like kind of like Late Night with Jack. Like he potentially is devilish. So like, I don't know. I started really thinking about it that way, like halfway through the film. I was like, oh, Late Night with like Jack, who kind of is the devil, or is at least like acting through things that he is doing to kind of make this deal almost with the devil for like the power and the fame.
I originally saw the trailer on Shudder's Instagram. I remember sending it to you.
Yep.
Thinking it was on Shudder, like, oh, dude, we got to watch this. Because it wasn't very long. And the impression it gave me was that now knowing Jack, I originally thought it was about like a late night host that is possessed by the devil.
See?
Because what their tagline was something to do with TV screens or audience or something like that. I thought he was like the devil possessing the audience in some way, shape, or form, which is a wild amount of power.
Which would have been so cool.
That's what I originally like, because like you, I kind of went into it kind of blind, not really knowing much, just seeing that little clip. I'm a little bummed that's not it.
Yeah, same.
But I can't say I'm disappointed.
I mean, yeah, I agree. Because I mean, to your first point, I think it would have been so cool if they really played on this like possession bit and it wasn't just Lily that got possessed or that had the possession in the film. It would have been really cool if somehow more possession ended up taking place. Maybe it becomes this like
Gus got possessed.
And No, literally.
But why is it always children being possessed?
Or Carmichael. Like Carmichael, because he was a skeptic. Like
he would write himself a check.
Literally, he's like, oh shit, I'm going to sign this for $500,000. Or like even the audience members, like, maybe a few of them get possessed or all of them. And it becomes like they can't escape the studio situation. I think there could have been a lot of different avenues that this film like could have taken. I don't think that it was bad necessarily. And that's actually where I was going to get kind of to round things out here is just like having seen the film, would I recommend it to others? And I would say I would definitely recommend it. I think that it was a fun ride. It had really great performances. The actors in it were really fantastic. I really liked how it was shot. I loved the feel of the 70s and, just like 70s Halloween. And also, we didn't mention this at all, but the wardrobe was fantastic.
They really
Loved
nailed
it.
the time period, I would say.
Yes.
Like they absolutely crushed it.
I think so too. They did a really fantastic job and nothing looked like fake. Like all the hairstyles, the clothes, everything really looked very authentic to the time period. So I would definitely recommend this. I would say it's something you should absolutely watch. And if anything, watch it for David. He does a fantastic job.
The behind the scenes part was a little me because they were having, for behind the scenes footage, they were having very private conversations.
Total 100%.
Like I understand like from making my own like doc, like getting BTS. Yeah, absolutely. That's the good stuff. That's the meat on the bone that people want to see. But they were extremely private conversations and no one's going to talk about there's just someone with a camera just standing there. Let's talk about your affair.
Nope, I agree. Yeah, it definitely felt like there's no way a camera would just be like directed at them as they're having this conversation. But yeah, I think that's all that we have for you guys today. That's kind of like my first impressions. And, we've got a little bit of the producer's take in here too as well.
Allie, come back. Allie, when you're done staring at the sun, please come back.
We miss you, Allie. We would love to do more of these kind of mini episodes in the future with like new films that we see. And the whole thought behind this would be to just kind of flesh out our initial thoughts and then be able to do more full length episodes on it later on, like kind of our normal format. But yeah, we love you guys so much. Allie, we'll be back soon. And yeah, we'll catch you guys next time on Spooky Chicks and Horror Flicks.
Do I get to say it?
Go ahead.
No, that's her thing. I can't take that away from her. Stay spooky, fuckers.